Boker Tov, Givrin.
Boker Tov.
Ma Shlomchem.
Tov.
Oh, that's very good after a quiz, to hear Tov Meods all over the place. Very good. I have several things we want to do today. First of all, we want to continue our review for the final exam. Secondly, we want to do some singing. And thirdly, I want to make a few comments with regard to the use of Holliday's lexicon. Remember that you're allowed to use Holliday's lexicon in the final exam on the translation portion alone. No other portion. You can't use it for the vocabulary. You can't use it for the parsing. You can only use it for the translation and the translation alone. So make certain that if you have a copy, you bring it with you, or that you arrange with someone else to borrow one or to share one while you're here, except don't both work in it at the same time over each other's shoulders, because then you'll be doing your translation together. Don't want that. So arrange either for someone to do their translation first and then give you the lexicon, or vice versa, and someone else do it later. Please don't run yourself short of time. If you do your translation at the beginning of the first hour and you're sharing the lexicon, get it to the individual by the beginning of the second hour so that you both have an hour to work on the translation. But it's always better if you can bring your own. Now, on the notes that I gave you on Ruth chapter 1, I want you to look, please, if you would, at footnote number 12. Footnote number 12. Footnote number 12 has to do with the use of cum in verse number 6. Thus she and her two daughters-in-law got ready to return, is the way I translate it. And there are two verbs there. We have wayakam and we have wayashav. We have, or actually it's watakam and watashav. It's the feminine. It's literally she arose, not she got ready. But it is often used with a second verb, here with watashav, merely to make an action vivid, according to Holliday's lexicon. But notice that Halot, Kohler and Baumgartner say something totally different about the same thing, the same verb, in the same article, at the same number. They say that cum frequently just added as an illustration of an event. That is just added as an illustration of an event. And they give a reference to Jenny and Westermann in the German. That's T-H-A-T there. And so I've told you this is an example showing that Holliday does not slavishly follow Halot, but provides a substantially different opinion. And then look at footnote number 13, where you see it again. Literally visited, where I've translated that Yahweh had provided for his people by giving them food. That's the verb pakad. Pakad is literally he visited. If you look at Holliday, he says take care of, take up the cause of. Therefore, this could be translated Yahweh had taken up the cause of his people, or Yahweh had taken care of his people. Halot doesn't even list those meanings. Totally absent. And in this particular case, Halot has far fewer options. 6 translation categories offered in Halot, and I believe that there are at least 9 that are listed in, no, there are 14 options listed by Holliday as compared to only 6 by Halot. That's part of the proof and evidence I offer you that Holliday is an individual lexicon separate from and independent of Halot, even though it is, according to the title page, I'll just read you exactly what it says, based upon the lexical work of Ludwig Kohler and Walter Baumgartner. Even though it's based upon their work, it is not slavishly based upon it. He does give his own conclusions, his own opinions, and his own suggestions for translation, sometimes very, very different from those of Halot. So don't assume that if you have Halot, you can just throw away or sell Holliday, or vice versa. These are 2 independent lexicons. They are good ones to look at and you should use them as separate reference sources. I know that there are some who say that if you have Halot, holiday is not necessary. But what you're doing is you're throwing out then a body of other referential evidence as a source where he has done adequate research and has come to his own conclusions, and all lexicons represent the opinions of their editors, and they are individual opinions. And so as you look at them, try not to think of it as, oh, well, all the Hebraists in the world agree with Kohler and Baumgartner, or all the Hebraists in the world agree with Holiday. No, in some cases, you may find both to be in a minority as compared to the majority of Hebraists. There are situations that neither one of them cover. One of them, for example, is the area of idioms. Idioms are very poorly analyzed and covered by both lexicons, as well as by BDB, and only Klein's deals adequately with most of the idioms of the Hebrew. And at times, Klein's even drops the ball. An example is the one you had in verse 14 of lifting up the voice and weeping. What does that mean, to lift up the voice? And I checked NIDOT, and I checked, I think, TWOT as well, to see what they would say, and none of them adequately handle this. Only Marc Babout, who is a Frenchman who has published his work on idioms in French, has even dealt with this issue adequately. And the lexicons ignore it and don't look at it. And so I've given you a note there, and in your translations I put a red M to show that it's an idiom, so you didn't lose any points over it. And in the margin I put, wept loudly. Wept loudly. To lift the voice means to make something loud. It's to raise the volume. All right? We use the same type of idiom, to raise the volume. And it's to weep loudly. And there were a few places where I saw someone that actually had the gall to say that if you did not translate it literally as to lift up the voice and wept, or lift up the voice and called, or lift up the voice and cried, that you were not translating properly and you were indulging in a paraphrase unnecessarily. And I strongly disagree with that. It's one of those cases where it shows a lack of adequate knowledge of Hebrew, not a faulty translation philosophy, but a lack of knowledge, an adequate knowledge of Hebrew and Hebrew idioms. That is the issue. And part of that lack is because there has not been any solid work published in English about biblical Hebrew idioms. It does not exist. And so I think Barbout's work is being translated into English and will be made available, but until then, we're all waiting for other people to step in and do the work. I've started one, but I've got so many other projects that it's not going to get done in the near future. So as you're reading through these notes, I'm trying to give you further instruction. You'll also see on page 2 of that translation with footnote number 17 that I provided you with a fuller description of the problem of the change in the gender of the pronominal suffixes used in Ruth chapter 1. And I've shown you there where it has the second masculine plural pronominal suffix referring to 2 daughters-in-law, that Paul Juon and Muraoka refer that to a case of the use of prior gender, the masculine, and Gesenius Couch Cowley prefer to see it as dialectical. It's a colloquial language of a particular time and locality. And also Edward F. Campbell believes that it is merely an early Hebrew feminine dual suffix. A dual, not a plural, but a dual, referring to the 2 daughters-in-law. And then I provide you with mine. My personal opinion is that it might be gender by attraction, attracted to either the prior subject of dealing in loyal love, Yahweh himself is the subject there, or to the deceased husbands of the women, looking at the women as representing their husbands. And so I hope that you'll use these carefully and wisely, help you to get through. Please don't pass these translations on to students who might be taking the course in the future, or who might be taking the course in exegesis for Judges and Ruth, because number one, if they happen to use it, and I see that it's my translation that they used, then that's plagiarism, or it's cheating. And number two, I have a nice, easy way of catching that, and that is all of my translations are in process, and some of this translation may even be changed by next year. And so I can even tell which year's notes are being used when it's happening like that. Don't be like the student who was caught by Dr. Snyder, who is going to be doctor in just a week and a half, so it's proleptically doctor. He's passed everything and will graduate, but Dr. Snyder had a student actually cite him as a reference without giving any footnote or indication that he was quoting him. And it happened to be from his THM thesis, and so he recognized it and checked, and sure enough, it was his. So be careful about plagiarizing. We all have our ways of trying to find out if you do, and we do different checks. And if we get to a point where we suspect plagiarism but can't prove it ourselves, we turn it over to the library staff and allow them to put their resources to work to find out, including checking to see what books the student has checked out recently. Yes, we even check that. So, yeah, you know, read the catalog. It says no plagiarizing. That is not allowed. That's considered, we look at that as a sin, because it is quoting someone without giving them reference. It's claiming something to be your own, which is not your own. So always give proper reference and cite that. And so I've tried to show you that also by what I've done here, to refer to those things where there are various views, and also to let you know who has the different views and to give you full resources. If in the future, if you're preaching in the book of Ruth and you want to find out, maybe 5 years down the road, and you say, I wish I had that updated version of Ruth 1 that Dr. Barrick has been working on, that is no longer completely in process but has more notes. If you want to get that, just send me an email and I'll just attach it to your emails and send it back to you. As I said the other day, you've paid your dues, you've done that more than one way, and I'll be glad to send that to you to be of help to you if you want to use it, if it's worth anything to you. All right? Okay, any questions before we move to review for the final exam? Gus?
How do you deal with plagiarism in the pulpit? As you're preaching, do you quote everything? I mean, how?
If I'm going to quote someone in the pulpit, I tell my people whom I'm quoting. I tell them whom I'm quoting. And I try to keep my quotes in the pulpit to a bare minimum, only very significant, important quotations. I try to limit myself to no more than 3 quotations per sermon. Sometimes I go as high as 5 in certain settings or situations, but I try to keep it at a minimum. All right? Now, if it's an illustration that I'm using, it depends on what source it is or what it's about. I may mention that this is from a biography on someone, and so they know that I've gotten it from someplace. But if it's a collection like Swindoll's collection, I don't bother to cite that at that point. You want to be careful of not having too many citations. You slow your sermon down and distract your people, and you don't focus on the message. But I try not to quote people without giving them reference. Okay? Yes, Dennis.
So it's sufficient not just to say that it's not your own, it's meaning a commentator?
Yes,
one commentator?
that's sufficient to just say a commentator. And if they want to know which one, you can tell them afterwards.
Yeah, so this,
Right.
You're going through a book, you don't want to keep saying, well, like during 1 Peter,
Right.
Hebrew.
Right, exactly. Yes, but you're not then letting them think that it's your words. All right? George?
In regard to illustrations, if you heard an illustration from like another sermon, would you have to cite that, or could you
If you're writing it out for a class here, yes, you have to cite it. But if it's in the pulpit, no. Okay? All right, well, let's move on then. Any questions on exam number 1? Yes, James.
On page 2 of the exam,
Yes.
1.7, are we going to have a chart like through again? Or
1.7, identify the following forms. This is a parsing exercise. Yes, you will have a parsing exercise that looks very much like that on the final exam. Might be different forms entirely, or I might include the actual forms instead of boxes. Okay? Could even be a mixture. Have the boxed forms like this and also have actual forms. But you will have a parsing exercise and it will be presented to you in chart form just as that is. Okay? Other questions on exam number 1? Anything that was counted wrong on yours that you haven't resolved, or that you had right but you have questions, or any particular? Yes, James.
As far as the section where we have to use the lexicon to translate,
Yes.
Is that going to be from previous translations that we've done, or is it like, would it be from something we've done off these exams, or is it just going to be anything?
If you read the final exam guide that I handed out to you, I think I explained that and said on translation, you'll be required to translate a portion of the Old Testament with only a lexicon for help. Holiday is preferable. The passage, I guess I didn't. On vocabulary, I said the final exam translation passage. So it's up there under vocabulary. The final exam translation passage will contain vocabulary having a considerable affinity to Ruth 1 and Psalm 103. So it may not be the exact same passage as Ruth 1 or Psalm 103, but it will not have any vocabulary that is outside of those two. Okay? Unless it is something that is very easy to figure out and to locate in the lexicon. In other words, I'm not going to try to trick you. I'm going to try to keep it within the realm of what you've done, the measure of vocabulary and style and things like that for Ruth 1 and Psalm 103. And part of the translation might even be one of those verses from Ruth 1 or Psalm 103. Okay? And as far as the vocabulary, make certain you go back over your vocabulary quiz you took today on Psalm 103 and your preceding vocabulary quiz on Ruth 1. Go back over those for vocabulary, because vocabulary from those two quizzes is most likely to be involved in the vocabulary section of the exam. Okay, let's go to exam number 2 then. Yes, John.
Can you repeat when it's hey at the last syllabus with the marquee in it? How do we write it out?
Okay, when you have a hey with a mapik in it at the end of a word, sometimes have it with a furtive pathic. The furtive pathic does not occur in just a hey. It'll occur only with the hey with the mapik. And sometimes it will be involved if we have here, for example, her horse has the mapik in it. If we have mare, a female horse, it does not have the mapik. This is just the feminine ending of the noun. This is a third feminine singular pronominal suffix. Okay? Is that your question?
And in the chart, in the classification, how do we...
In what classification? Yes, I see what you mean. It's called, if you have a verb, can't think of one right offhand, but if you have a verb with a hey with a mapik, whether it has a pathak under it or not, that is called a lamed guttural or a third guttural. If the hey, like in asa, does not have a mapik, then that is a lamed hey verb or a third hey. Is that what you mean? Okay. If it has the mapik in it, as a third root letter of a verb form, and only there, as the third root letter of a verb form, then it is a 3 guttural, not a 3 hey. The Mapik changes it to a consonant rather than it being a silent sound that's combined with the comet's hey to form a full letter vowel, like at the end of asa. All right? Good question. Scott?
Just repeat your kind of conclusion there. The Mapik changes it to a consonant.
It changes it to a consonant rather than having it be a silent letter that's part of the comet's hey full letter vowel, like on the end of asa. All right? Other questions on exam number 2? If on the translation, if I deem that one of the words, because of my choice of the text, and I say I've got to use this text because all but one word fit all the categories I've given to you, but one word might really throw you, I will provide a note about that and provide you with sufficient information to help you identify it or to get by with it. So on the final exam, I try to be as fair as possible. And if there's something that I just have chosen a passage and I'm saying I want to use it, but there's something there that it might really throw you because it's unusual, not encountered before, something that would make it extra difficult, then I will provide a note of some sort. I'll either give you the roots so you can look it up in the lexicon, or I will identify it further for you. Okay? Any other questions on exam number 2? All right, let's move to all the vocabulary quizzes that we've had. Did you have any question on any of your vocabulary quizzes with regard to the translations of any of the word forms? Yes, George?
Just the quiz we just took this morning for Ham, I put have compassion on.
Have compassion on is fine. Okay. Yes, David?
Is there a distinction between mashal and malak?
Mashal means to rule or govern. Malak means to reign as king. So mashal is used of the more general sense of ruling and governing, of princes, of nobles, of governors, whereas malak is reserved for kings. That's the difference. They both basically can be translated as he ruled. Okay? They're synonyms, but there's slight differences in their semantic ranges. All right? Other questions on vocabulary? Yes, Eric.
Should we memorize the vocab that occurs once in theme groups in Psalm 130, like stuff like masher or eagle, or like the word for grass or flower and stuff like that?
No. No, don't. Stick with those words that occur 2 or more times within a passage. Okay? All right? So if you're going back over all the vocabulary of Psalm 103 and Ruth 1, which is a wise thing to do, don't bother with those that occur only once in those passages. Stick with those that are found at least twice in those passages. That's what I've attempted to preserve and use in the quizzes, and that's the same as I'll do on the final exam. Any other questions about vocabulary? Okay, any questions about the sections in Hebrew Bible Insert by Putnam? I gave you section 143 on the uses of the article, 181 on the uses of the construct, 214 on the PL, 225 on the participle, and 322 on the while plus non-verb or disjunctive clauses. While we're on that, let me open up my copy here, so if you have a question, I can show it up here on the screen as well. Yes, Jan.
And 181C, there's an epigetical, and then I don't understand the difference between under the same 181C number 10, it's on 10.
All right.
What is the difference between those two?
Okay, let me turn there to that. get it open here. Okay, you're at 181C. Number 2. Okay, 181C has to do with attributive chains of the construct. And number 2 is epexegetical, where noun number 2 explains or clarifies noun number 1. In other words, noun number 1 with regard to number 2. So as we look at the examples that he's given here, he talks about attractive to see. Yafot mara'eh. Literally, yafot is from yafeh, and it is put in the feminine plural because parot is in feminine plural, the noun, cows, parot. Yafot, attractive. Mara'eh, literally, it's attractive of sight. Attractive of sight. So it means attractive with regard to sight. Attractive with regard to seeing. In other words, how are they attractive? The epexegetical genitive explains how they are attractive. Attractive how? Attractive to see. You also have the man was harsh and wicked. And wicked is, okay, come on now. There we go. Wera ma'elalim, and wicked of deeds. Wicked of deeds. In other words, wicked with regard to deeds. Wicked with regard to deeds. In what way was he wicked? Explain. Epexegetical means explanatory. Explanatory, it explains. Okay? That's one kind of genitive usage. Other questions in Putnam? Yes, Gus?
On the disjunctive clauses in 3.2.2,
Yes.
it talks about the medial, and he talks about the disjunctive clauses also interrupt a wide-told storyline, adding information that anticipates and helps explain what just happened or is about to happen. I guess I have a hard time sort of identifying those as we're translating and knowing, because they just, to me, seem, I could just put an and.
All right. In most cases you can put and, but the way you recognize it is like, for example, in Ruth 1, where you have those cases. In fact, let me open up the text here so I can show you what I'm talking about. Let's go to verse 22, for example. In verse 22, thus, and by the way, verse 22 begins with thus because it's obviously, by context, the concluding statements, not then they returned, because it's already talked about them returning. In the context, preceding context, they have already returned. We've already talked about them returning. So they're not returning again a second time. This is a summary statement. Thus, therefore, Naomi and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law with her, notice the Zakef Katon there, who returned. Notice Hashabah is a kal, active participle, feminine singular with a definite article, and it is modifying kalatach, her daughter-in-law, returned from the fields of Moab, and we take fields here as figurative, is being used of the country of Moab, not the literal fields. It doesn't mean they lived in the fields, lived in the wild or in the open fields. They probably lived in a town. They came from Bethlehem and probably went to a town that would be similar. But they dwelled in the country of, who returned from the country of Moab. Notice wahema, the wow on a non-verb. And it is a full sentence. Wahema ba'u. Ba'u is the verb. Ba'u is the verb. Hema is the subject. They entered Bethlehem, Beth-Hilat, at the beginning of Ketzir, the harvest of Seorim, of barley, the barley harvest. Now, because that wow is on a non-verb, notice it comes after the athnak. So it's the second major logical division of the verse. It is a complete sentence. And the wow is not a wayik tol. It is attached to a non-verb. That is a disjunctive clause. So we have to ask, is this a contrast or adversative disjunctive clause? But they entered Bethlehem. No, that doesn't seem to have any contrast here. Doesn't seem to fit at all. Well, then it's a parenthetical background information. In this case, it's a concluding one to the entire narrative of chapter 1. And so if that were to occur in the middle of a narrative, however, then it would be medial, like you had in Genesis 37, where it talked about the pit that was in the wilderness that they wanted to throw him into, and it said, Habor, the pit, was empty, it had no water. And so that is a parenthetical comment to offer explanation. It interrupts the flow of the narrative to give necessary information. Otherwise, someone might be thinking, well, why did they drop him into it? If it's got water in it, a cistern, he might drown. Were they trying to kill him by drowning? No. The parenthesis, a medial parenthetical comment, helps then to explain the situation by providing the information that helps us to better understand it.
So you would translate it with parentheses?
With parentheses, right. Just as I used a parenthesis in the translation here for the last verse. If you look at page 3 of the translation I handed to you, there's parentheses. That's the only case in which parentheses occur in a Hebrew translation, as if you have parenthetical disjunctive clauses. Parentheses should not be used in any other place for any other reason. All right, gentlemen, we were at Ruth chapter 1. We were talking about disjunctive clauses discussed in section 3.2.2 in Putnam Hebrew Bible Insert. We looked at verse 22. Now I want you to look at verse 14. In verse 14, we have watisena kolan, wetiv kana, od. So they literally lifted up their voice and wept again. In other words, they wept loudly again, or again they wept loudly. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. Notice, and kissed, watishak, from the verb nashak, it has a noon, it's a pay noon, one noon verb, is a wayik tol. But notice that the next verb is not. Weruth davka bach. But Ruth clung to her. Now notice that you have a wow on a non-verb. The wow is on Ruth. Ruth is the subject of the verb davka. Davka is a cal perfect third feminine singular verb. So we have a full sentence. And yet the wow is not on the verb, it's on the non-verb. It is contrasting the actions of the two women. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Therefore, it is a disjunctive clause used with the adversative or contrastive function. And therefore, we translate it with but. How do we identify it? We have a full sentence, we have a subject, we have a verb, we have a wow, but the wow is attached to a non-verb. So that's to answer Gus's question again on how do you recognize that? How do you identify it? Now here it is not parenthetical. It's not an explanation or background information given to help us better understand the situation. It is a contrasted action by one of the two key individuals that are being talked about. Okay? All right, did that help answer, Gus, by using those two? All right, yes. Scott.
Same point with regards to the parenthetical, number 1, and the terminal, number 3, in the first example you gave us on verse 22. How would we distinguish the two? That seems like it would be terminal being at the end of that narrative section.
It is terminal. It's not medial. That's what I said. It's terminal.
Terminal and parenthetical?
Yes. It's a parenthesis at the end that is used as a summary explanation before we continue with a new scene. A new scene opens up in chapter 2, where we are locating ourselves not just in Bethlehem, but out in a field outside of Bethlehem. We have a different setting, a different situation, and so the chapter division is correctly placed at that point.
So could there be also A medial parenthetical?
Yes, that's one of them. They're listed here as I have it up here on the screen. Medial. Medial interrupts the Wayik told storyline, and I gave as an example of that the one we had in Genesis 37 that explained about the cistern or the pit being empty without water. That's an example of the medial.
I was misunderstanding the
Okay?
designations here, right?
And Ruth 122 is an example of the final, or closing or concluding. All right? Okay? Other questions from Putnam? All right? While you're thinking about that, let me bring your attention to three things up here on the board. OT 603. I assume that all of you are going to be in OT 603, Introduction to Hebrew Exegesis, in the fall. I believe the dean also put it down for the spring. I was dismayed to find that out. Try to teach them all on one semester. It's enough work to do as it is. But if you're going to be in there in 603 in the fall, one of the things you want to do over the summer is continue reading Hebrew Bible Insert by Putnam. It is a required textbook in 603, so bring it with you. And also, I would suggest that if you're having difficulty in Hebrew, that you take Dr. Grisanti's Hebrew readings class this summer. It is an excellent way to maintain your Hebrew over the summer and to get an extra boost on reading the text and being involved in translation under the guidance of someone. And it's an excellent course to take. It's very well done. He and I have alternated. Sometimes I teach the Advanced Hebrew Readings course. Sometimes he offers the Advanced Hebrew Readings along with the regular Hebrew Readings for students that are THM, just requiring more of them. But this is a course that's intended. The whole reason we designed it was so that someone who needed that extra boost to help keep them going over the summer, to bring them into 603 sharp and ready, that's the course to take. So if you have the opportunity to take that, or are thinking about it, or still haven't made up your mind, that's an excellent one to take. Also, please keep in mind, I know it's still early. This is just your second semester of Hebrew. You're looking ahead to the third semester with Introduction to Hebrew Exegesis. We highly recommend, and that's all three of us in Old Testament. That's myself, Dr. Grisanti, and Dr. Buznitz. We highly recommend taking a fourth semester of Hebrew. Why? Because Introduction to Hebrew Exegesis, you learn the methodology and you begin to apply it, but you haven't had the opportunity to do a thorough book study through a consistent context, verse after verse, day after day, week after week, following through and seeing how it all works out. And that's why we offer the exegetical courses. Why Dr. Grisanti offers exegesis of Deuteronomy. It's selected passages in Deuteronomy, selected passages in Isaiah. I offer Psalms, and in Psalms we cover 10 Psalms at a time, and we do that progressively so that, for example, this summer I'm teaching Psalms 60 to 69, and then in the following spring I'll be teaching Psalms 70 through 80, hopefully, 70 through 80. So if you want to take a fourth semester, you could take the spring course I offer in Psalms. Dr. Grisanti is thinking about possibly offering an exegesis course in 1st and 2nd Kings, again, obviously selected. From time to time, we offer other courses. I've offered Jonah, Obadiah. Dr. Buznitz just taught Zechariah and Joel. And sometimes I offer Amos and Joel. And sometimes I offer Judges and Ruth. And what it is a select few chapters in Judges, and then all the book of Ruth. And then I also have a course in Jonah, and we have a number of other courses that we offer from time to time. So please think about that seriously, to round out your Hebrew, to give it a chance, the same as you do with Greek, to take a book exegesis type course to apply all that you've learned. It's very important to help seal that. So think about leaving one of your electives open for doing that. It's not, this fourth semester is not required. As much as we'd like to require it, we've got so much required already we can't require it. But one of these days we're going to be hopefully changing some of the formatting and trying to make the Hebrew totally equivalent to the Greek, to where it's 4 required semesters. And When that occurs, we'll be all very happy in the Old Testament department. But it takes a lot of work to do it because we have to think of the whole program and we have to make certain that everything is properly arranged in order to do it. James?
Since we only have a limited number of electives, if we had to choose between those two, would you recommend the fourth semester of Hebrew versus Hebrew readings?
That depends on your abilities. If you get through this course with a B or an A, I don't think Hebrew readings are necessary for anyone that has an A in here. For a B, it's up to you, but it's not necessary. If you have less than a B, if you have a B minus down below that, Hebrew readings, I would highly recommend, even if you end up not taking a fourth semester of Hebrew. At least you'll have 4 semesters of Hebrew. One will just be the Hebrew readings. Okay? And I think Dr. Grisanti would probably echo that same thing. All right, any further questions about this? All right, any further questions on Putnam for the final exam? Let me go back to the section on the article, 1.4.3, and try to give you an idea of the type of questions that you might see. Notice that you have here different uses of the article. The anaphoric use of the article, which means it's referring back to a precedingly a noun mentioned in the preceding context. That's what we call an article of previous reference. Article of previous reference is the same as the anaphoric article. For example, in Leviticus 2, it's Genesis 1 there, and there was light, or light came to be actually. You have or without the article, and then it says, and then God saw the light. And now it has the article, ha-or. The article on ha-or there at the end of the line is referring back to the previous reference to or, where it didn't have the article. And oftentimes, especially in Moses' writings, and especially in the early chapters of Genesis, the first time any noun is mentioned, especially a key noun, it normally does not have the article put on it in the text, even though it is considered definite by context. And then all subsequent references use the anaphoric article, the article of previous reference, the previously mentioned light. So it's clear that we're talking about that same light. Okay? That's what's intended there. Now, what I would ask is perhaps be a matching thing, that you'd have anaphoric article, and on the opposite side somewhere would be in that list article of previous reference. So I would expect you to be able to match those up. Or it might be a question, give 2 different uses of the definite article. And that means you don't say that it makes something definite, all right? Because that's obvious. But it's like the anaphoric article, the article of previous reference. The first time that a noun is mentioned is often articular because it refers to a specific person or thing that's required. This is the idea of specificity, a specific reference. And then you have 143C, a noun may be articular because it refers to a person or event known. This is one that is well known to the original audience. Demonstrative, where the article is translated as a demonstrative pronoun. As in, I have declared to you today, literally is this day, hayom. I have sinned this time, hatati hapa'am. I have sinned this time, literally, I have sinned the time. But that doesn't make any sense in English, does it? I have sinned the time? No, it's the demonstrative use of the article. I've sinned this time. The distinctive use, when a common noun functions as a proper noun. When a common noun like Elohim is referring to the true and supreme God. Jan?
Under anaphorical article, there's a 1.43b and 1.43c. Are they under anaphorical article?
No.
Or how are they called?
A is anaphorical. Anaphoric. A is anaphoric.
And what's the name for 1.43b?
He didn't give a name here. He just left a general description for it. But it's the specific article, the specifying, the specificity. All he said here is refers to a specific person or thing. And C just puts known in italics. and D uses a title demonstrative, and E uses the title distinctive, and F uses the title vocative. Vocative is where the article on a noun, usually a proper name, is to be taken as a vocative of address. O Baal, answer us. Habbaal, Enenu. And I have a message for you, O king. Literally, I have a message for you, the king. But we don't translate it, the king. It's O king. And then the relative use of the article, especially when it's on participles. When the article is attached to participles, it normally indicates a relative clause, just like the article on the participle in Greek. Same thing. And then H, generic, referring to a class or type of people, animals, or things. And then I, the superlative. The article is used with gradable adjectives to indicate the superlative. When you have here, Wayiwater Yotam ben Yerubbaal Hakaton, Yotham, Yerubbaal's youngest son. Literally, the little. The little is the youngest. For you are the least of all nations. Ki atem hamat. Literally, because you are the little. You are the less mikol from all the peoples. You are the least. So article is used as a superlative. And then just a note on J that the article is rare in poetry. So that definiteness must be contextually inferred. So Malkei Eretz is the kings of the earth, even though it doesn't have the article. So in poetry, the article is rare. All right? So those are a total of 11 uses of the definite article. And you could have various ways in which I do that. I might even have hayom, today, and ask, what use of the article does this represent? And I would give you not only the Hebrew, I'd give you the translation. I don't want you, on a question like this, I don't want you guessing or coming up with a different translation that might lead you a different way. I will give you the translation by which you will identify the use. Okay? All right? Does that help to understand a little bit more about the type of questions and the ways that I might do it in the exam? It can be matching, it can be complete, it could be answering a direct question. It might be saying, name 2 uses of the article. You have 10 of them there. Choose 2 or 3 out of them. I'll usually specify, give me 2 uses or 3 uses of the article. Yes, James.
Is that the same way the questions will be for the construct, and as we go through
Same for all the rest.
to be able to identify what kind of use it
Yes.
is?
Okay. And on none of these will I be supplying you with a Hebrew text, a sentence, and saying, okay, identify the construct in this, without providing the translation or anything else. No, it'll be far more specific than that. And where I want to have something definite, I'll provide you with identification of exactly what it is, and I will be providing you with the translation of it. Now, here's another thing to watch out for. If you haven't learned by now, I'll just warn you one last time. All right? Many times, some of the more difficult questions I ask on an exam will actually be answered elsewhere in the exam. All right? So that if you pay attention to the exam, and if you got one right and you read it carefully, then you're going to have an obvious reference for a later reference back to the same thing. Now, it's not that I'm going to be putting it, it's not information that you have to supply both times, it's information I supply in spite of what answer you give. So watch that carefully. Okay? Because I do that, and I do that to find out if you're really assimilating what you're taking in the exam at the same time. If you're understanding, or if you're going through and say, oh, he already talked about that, or I already answered that, or that's already here. It will be there. Sometimes it's on parsing. I'll give an example in the parsing that I've already given for you up in the examples, or I gave it to you in an example on the parsing guide, and you're asked to parse it in translation. And I've already given it to you. So watch for those type things. Okay, any other questions about the final exam? This is your chance to do it. This is the last opportunity. Well, then I think that the only thing left to do is to sing. And then we can release you early today. Do you remember Lo Vayom Velo Valayla? Right? Not by day and not by night. All right? Lo Vayom Velo Valayla Cheres Etzeli Atayla Lo bahar velo vabika, shita omda sham atika. Lo bahar velo vabika, shita omda sham atika. You got it? Let's go back over this again. I'm requiring you to read the Hebrew instead of giving the transliteration, but you should be able to make it, right? In fact, did I give you, I think it was back in 503 syllabus, I actually gave you the whole song in the syllabus in transliteration as well as in Hebrew. So if you ever want to go back and get that, you'll have it there at 503 syllabus, I think. All right, let's sing this again. Lo vayom velo valayla Cheres Etzeli Atayla, Lo bahar velo vavika, Shita omda sham atika. Lo bahar velo vavika, Shita omda sham atika. Vehashita potrachidot, Umagida hi atidot, et hashita esh al ani, mivamiya hechatani, et hashita esh al ani, mivamiya hechatani, umeayen yavoshita, Hamipolino milita, Hamerkava yavor shvilo, Ovemaklo uvtarmilo, Hermakava yavor shvilo. Oh, excuse me, I blew that one. Let's move on. I started the whole verse over again. Umayavili shilumim, Cherusei penim o agumim, umatoro zachol shachor, almanhu emodo bachur, umatoro zachol shachor, almanhu emodo bachur, shemazaken shita tova, Aslo eshma, aslo over, Omar lavi hemiteni, Uvyaksaken altigneni, La reglau evol veshaken, Aklozaken, aklozaken. And what's that last line say? Not an old man. Not an old man. All right, great.